Well, yesterday, the US Coast Guard revealed that all 5 people who'd been aboard the submersible, hoping to see the wreck of the Titanic, had died. What went so tragically wrong is now under investigation. The BBC has seen emails which show that warnings over the safety of the Titan sub were dismissed by the company's CEO. Also on the programme. Banks here in the UK have agreed to offer greater flexibility to mortgage holders who are potentially facing huge increases in their monthly payments due to another rate rise. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi continues his state visit to the US, with President Joe Biden calling the partnership with India among the most consequential in the world. A man's been found guilty of murdering a police sergeant, but how did he manage to smuggle a gun into a custody centre? And the tents have been pitched, the sun has been shining, and now 200,000 people will spend the weekend enjoying some of the world's biggest music stars. Yep, it can only be Glastonbury. Now we start with developments on the death of 5 people on board the submersible, which went missing in the Atlantic on Sunday. And the BBC has seen email messages showing that warnings over the safety of OceanGate's Titan sub were repeatedly dismissed by the CEO of the company. The messages were exchanged with a leading deep-sea exploration specialist. Now, the worries were over the craft's unusual design, its non-spherical shape, the reliability of the material it was made of, carbon fibre, and the fact it had also not been through any external independent certification or classing process. Now, the BBC has been exclusively given an email exchange between Stockton Rush, that's the CEO of OceanGate who died in the incident, and a leading deep water exploration specialist, Rob McCallum. So let's take a look at them. So this was an email sent in 2018. Rob McCallum warned Stockton Rush, "I have given everyone the same honest advice, which is that until a sub is classed, tested and proven, it should not be used for commercial deep dive operations." He went on, "As much as I appreciate entrepreneurship and innovation, you are potentially putting an entire industry at risk. So I implore you to take every care in your testing and sea trials and to be very, very conservative." Now, a few days later, OceanGate's Stockton Rush replied, "I've grown tired of industry players who try to use a safety argument to stop innovation and new entrants from entering their small existing market." He told Rob McCallum, "Since Guillermo, the former co-founder of OceanGate, and I started OceanGate, we've heard the baseless cries of 'you are going to kill someone' way too often. I take this as a serious personal insult." Now, the next day, Rob McCallum replied in the starkest terms, "I think you are potentially placing yourself and your clients in a dangerous dynamic. Ironically, in your race to Titanic, you are mirroring that famous catch cry, 'She is unsinkable.'" Now, OceanGate's lawyers then contacted Rob McCallum and threatened legal action. Today, we have contacted them again, and they say they have no additional information. Robert McCallum maintains that no one should have gone in this submersible. Well, this morning we heard from William Conan, chairman of the US Marine Technology Society Manned Underwater Vehicles Committee. In 2018, he and other engineers wrote a letter to Stockton Rush warning of the dangers of using an uncertified craft.
This was clearly preventable. We do have regulations. I think the issue has to come out here is that as an industry, and look, we make submersibles. We've been making submersibles here in Los Angeles for 30 years. There's some of the best submarines in the world. There is order in the industry. There are ways to be clever and go around things. So for sure, it needs to be clear that a submersible like this, of what they were doing for tourism, would not be allowed in U.S. waters. The Coast Guard would not allow it. It would not be allowed to work in British coastal waters because it would have required it to be certified. Same thing in Canada. And then turns out that they operated in international waters where no Coast Guard has jurisdiction. Well, you found 2 loopholes. And let's just say it wasn't very wise.
Well, the director of the film Titanic, James Cameron, completed 33 dives to the site, and here's what he said.
You know, the community, our community of deep ocean engineers spoke out against it quite loudly, and the warnings were unheeded.
Now, before these developments, the co-founder of OceanGate spoke to the BBC and rejected claims that they had cut any corners.
Any expert who weighs in on this, including Mr. Cameron, will also admit that they were not there for the design of the sub, for the engineering of the sub, for the building of the sub, and certainly not for the rigorous test program that the sub went through.
An investor in OceanGate who previously made the same trip, Aaron Newman, told the BBC that the idea that Stockton Rush did anything wrong was disingenuous.
He was doing something far beyond what anybody else had. Like the sub that he built and was taking down there was a magnitude more advanced than, for instance, you look at the craft that James Cameron took down. That was a tiny little sub that one person laying flat in could operate. So, you know, he introduced new ideas and new pieces that are not conventional, and some people don't like that.
Well, with more on the latest from Boston, I'm joined now by our correspondent, Carl Nasman. And Carl, just really tell us the latest from where you are. What's happening now?
Well, the biggest point of reference right now is these concerns about safety and this big conversation that's beginning to emerge. And I think it's interesting to look at a couple of points there. One of them is these concerns that are coming out now. So very experienced deep sea explorers like James Cameron, who basically looked at the facts on the table and said, you know, he had some concerns about the design, he had some concerns about the material used. And then it's also interesting to look that many of these other concerns that were raised were about 5 years ago. So many of these, the email exchanges we just heard about, the letter sent to CEO Stockton Rush, that all took place in 2018. And of course, this was 5 years ago. It's also even a few years before the Titan made its first visit in 2021 to the shipwreck of the Titanic. So there were warnings even before this Titan vessel began making these dives about the experimental nature of it, about the shape, the design of the vessel itself, and also the material, the carbon fiber there. So that is definitely the conversation now on a day in which we're also beginning to remember the victims, and of course more than the 4 people that died here. But now that the dust has settled a bit and the investigation is beginning just about 900 miles from here in Boston, these questions about safety, questions now, but also questions from 5 years ago.
You're absolutely right there to mention the fact that that we are mourning the loss of 5 people. In terms of sort of the salvage situation, in terms of trying to give their families any sort of solace after all this, you know, what's able to happen? What are they able to do? Because obviously, the remains of the sub and these people are in a very, very inhospitable environment.
Yeah, that's the words that were used yesterday by the U.S. Coast Guard, that the ocean and the deep ocean is just so inhospitable. They didn't answer directly exactly whether or not any kind of bodies or human remains would be able to be recovered from the site, but it sounds unlikely. This is a very deep part of the ocean, and we also know that the way that this vessel likely imploded, it happened with so much force. In fact, what some people have described it as the weight of the Eiffel Tower weighing down on top of that submersible. It's unlikely that we will ever see any bodies recovered, but that doesn't mean that this recovery mission isn't continuing out there. There's a ROV making its way to the site now that will begin to continue to look for debris down below, look for key pieces of this submersible, and presumably look for any human remains that might be recovered. But this is now a recovery mission, and it will continue into the days and likely weeks to come.
Okay, Carl, thank you. Carl, I just want to bring you some breaking news. I mean, there's been different lines coming in regarding this submersible incident all the time. The latest we've just had is some news that Canada's Transportation Safety Board have announced a probe into the loss of the Titan submersible. I'm just reading, these are from the Reuters news agency here. In a statement, the board has said it was launching a safety investigation regarding regarding the circumstances of this operation because, and the reason, if you're wondering why it was a Canadian ship, is because the Titan's surface support vessel, the Polar Prince, was a Canadian flagged ship. As I say, sort of so many lines coming in about this story all the time, but just the latest we can give you there. Canada's Transportation Safety Board on Friday announcing a probe into the loss of the Titan submersible, and it's launching a safety investigation. Clearly, lots of the questions at the moment are to do with the safety both beforehand and obviously during the mission. Lots more questions that people are asking, and I want to bring in my next guest, Ofer Keter. He's a submersible pilot. He is the president of Submerge. This is a submersibles consulting and operations company. He's been a sub pilot for more than 20 years. So thank you very much for joining us on the programme, Ofer. Can I ask your reaction? Did you have any concerns when you heard about what had happened and perhaps your knowledge of the company before this happened?
Good evening, Sarah. Thank you for having me on the show. My personal experience and my company's experience in the submersible world is very different than what has happened with OceanGate and what happened with the Titan on the Titanic for many reasons. So yes, I obviously I had my thoughts and had my analysis based on the very little information that was available originally, but it is an extreme one-off kind of event, and it does not fall in line with my and our experience in the submersible world for over 2 decades.
In terms of sort of legislation and sort of safety testing, when you're sending a submersible down to depths, perhaps not as deep as this, what is the legislation? What is the safety testing? How rigorous is it?
So any submersible that we use as pilots or as operators is designed by certified manufacturers that have a very rigorous engineering process. They didn't start this process a few years ago or even 10 years ago. They started it many decades ago based on past experience, past knowledge, past engineering, and they have evolved with the engineering, but always sticking to very strict guidelines that exist today. We have American Bureau of Shipping, we have DNV, we have Lloyd's Register. There are standards, there are guidelines, there are procedures, there are testing methods that exist and are being used by the industry. And that's why I feel that it is extremely important to explain to the public that this event, this tragic event, is one of a kind, is one-off, it's unique, it's extreme, and it's not what the industry of travel and leisure and private submersible exploration is accustomed to.
Okay, Ofer, thank you very much for your insight this evening. We'll have to leave it there for the moment, but I just want to remind you of the breaking news that we had this evening to do with this story. This is the statement from Canada's Transportation Safety Board, TSB, which have announced a probe into the loss of the Titan submersible. So they released a statement. It said the board was launching this safety investigation regarding the circumstances of the operation because the Titan's surface support vessel, that's the Polar Prince, was a Canadian flagged ship. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.